Shalom, and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat teaching with TBA Rabbinic Intern, Aviva Frank.
Marshall, can you repeat that? Because that is a great segue for our learning today. What is it?
If you feed them, they will come.
If you feed them, they will come. That is a perfect introduction for what we're going to be studying today at this Seudat Shlishit. This coming attraction of next week's Torah portion that we just read right now. And it's all about the splitting of the Reed Sea and the Song of the Sea. So today we're going to look at that moment as the sea splits, and something amazing that the Midrash says happens during the splitting of the sea. And then we're going to also look at some verses that happen after that that have to do with the manna. So it's all about if you feed them, they will come. And instead of Song of the Sea, snacks of the sea. So before we get to the snacking portion, please munch away on your delicious Seudat Shlishit food. But before we get to about the snacks of the sea, let's see what happens in the moment that the sea splits. And we're going to look at some Rashi just to set the scene of what was going on. Does someone want to read for us in box 1, Shemot chapter 14, verse 15?
God said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Speak to the Israelites and let them journey forth."
So we have this moment where Moses is praying to God. There's chaos on the banks of the Reed Sea of what to do next. And there's a rebellion forming. And Moses stands to the side and starts praying to God for direction. And God responds to Moses and said, "Hey, why are you crying out to me? Why are you praying to me right now? This is a moment of action." And we can see this if we look at the Rashi of what is happening here. And it seems a little bit confusing because we might think about moments of indecision in our life. We want to cry out to God for God to help us. But God is saying, you already knew I was going to be on your side. You already knew that I have helped you with my signs and wonders from the 10 of the plagues, and that you're going to be saved right now. And once again, I will be on your side. So you have to take action and journey forth. And so if we look at speak to the Israelites and let them journey forth, all they have to do is travel, for the sea is not going to stand in their way. The merit of their forebears and their own merit of faith they showed me when they left Egypt is enough to split the sea for them. So we know that they had to take, as we read this morning, a lamb tied to the bed. They brought on the 10th day. They didn't know what day was going to then be the Paschal sacrifice. It ended up being on the 14th. And then they had in Egypt their first, what we might call today a Seder, with eating of the Paschal sacrifice, some bitter herbs and matzah. And they also took the blood of that Paschal sacrifice and hyssop branch and put on their mezuzot. This was a brave act for them to show their commitment to God to their Egyptian neighbors. And so in this merit, of course this sea is going to split for them. They just had to travel forth. Okay? So we see that from this moment of chaos and of not knowing what to do, of Moses praying on the side, God's like, lead them forward. The miracle is going to happen. It's going to be great. Does someone want to read box 2 for us? Chapter 14, verse 19 and 20.
Oops. Why the gray one here?
No, the angel of God.
Okay. Huh. The angel of God who had been advancing in front of the Israelite camp moved. Going behind it, the pillar of cloud moved from them in front of them and stood at their rear.
All right, so now we can set the scene of what is going. So there had been, as we read here, this angel of God, which had taken the form of the pillar of cloud that was in front, guiding them, and moves to the back of them. Okay, so just see that they have what's leading them forward in direction. It had been leading in the direction. It stops and goes behind them where they have to journey forth on their own, but there's something about this pillar of cloud that's also protecting them from the rear, standing in between them and the advancing Egyptian army with chariots. So we can see that about here in the first box by Rashi, but I want us to look at the second box, which I think is quite interesting, of what is happening at this moment at the scene. So the pillar of cloud moved. At nightfall, when the pillar of cloud handed over the Israelite camp to the pillar of fire, the cloud did not disappear completely as it usually did in the evening, but moved and went behind the Israelites in order to make it dark for the Egyptians. So there's something occurring now where either there's a choshech, or darkness, for the Egyptians. It's standing in between the Israelites and the Egyptians for protection, or it's also creating a darkness for the Israelites. So suddenly it went from day to night. So if you already think at this moment of uncertainty and chaos, suddenly it's night. It almost sounds a little bit like there's a solar eclipse that's happening. It was day and suddenly it's night as they're crossing the Red Sea. But just kind of set the scene. Imagine what you would be feeling at this moment. Okay, let's look at verse 20. Do we have another reader? Still in box 2. Would you like to read for us verse 20?
It came between the Egyptian camp and the Israelite camp. Thus there was a cloud and darkness for the Egyptians, but the pillar of the fire illuminated the night for the Israelites. Neither camp came near the other all through the night.
Amazing. That's exactly what we read. So there's like this choshech, or real darkness, for the Egyptians, and it's nighttime for the Israelites, but there's a pillar of fire now that is guiding them and helping them see the way as they cross. So it was just day, and now it's night during the crossing. So I want us to turn the page, and still in the same box, look up a little bit what Rashi says. So if we look at the very one, but it illuminated the pillar of fire the night for the Israelites. It went ahead of them as it would do every night, but the darkness of the cloud in front of the Egyptians hid the light from them. So this, I think, is interesting to note. So even though in the Peshat it says that though it was nighttime, they had the fire illuminating, we're hearing here from Rashi that actually, even though the fire was there, it was hidden in a way. And so I think that's just to notice for ourselves. Imagine you're there, this moment of chaos, what's happening at this, and you think, you know there's light, but you can't see the light. So there's something about God revealing and concealing God's self at this moment, and a feeling of uncertainty, and where you might feel a little bit, wow, I'm really on my own. And I think this was the challenge that God is asking of the Israelites. To what does it mean to be truly free? They were really helped and supported through the signs and wonders to get to the point of where they had to take the action of bringing in the Paschal lamb and then putting it on the mezuzot, putting on their doorposts. And then now this moment of crossing the Red Sea, of stepping into their own freedom. They're being asked a lot of themselves. And they're probably scared. And they also have to connect to their own bravery and trust in themselves and as each other as a unit. They also probably are hungry. So can someone read for me at Shemot 14:22, chapter 14, verse 22. We're getting to the food.
And the Israelites went into the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left.
Wonderful. So when they crossed the Israelites into the land of Canaan via the Jordan, about 40 years later, it's just one wall. But at this moment, there's two separate walls that are being formed. And we can see they probably are hungry. They've worked up an appetite, making this big decision, getting over their fear. The last thing they ate was the Paschal lamb, the bitter herbs, and the matzah. And now they probably need a little snack. And so we have a midrash in Shemot Rabbah that builds on what could actually be growing in those walls of the water. Now, let's first think of our imagination. What do we think could be in the walls? We might imagine, like in Prince of Egypt, there's a whale. Maybe we think that there's some coral reefs. Who's ever went snorkeling in the Red Sea, there's beautiful fish and coral reefs. But could we imagine there'd be snacks? Okay, maybe some seaweed, some kelp. The first sushi was eaten by the Israelites at this moment. But this midrash says something else was happening. And it also is going to touch upon what does it mean to enter the sea on dry land and not muddy land. So I'm going to read for us in box 4. The children of Israel came into the midst of the sea upon dry ground, and the waters were a wall for them to their right and to their left. The children of Israel came into the midst of the sea upon dry ground. If in the midst of the sea, Why on dry ground? And if on dry ground, why in the midst of the sea? Seems counterintuitive. Rather, from here we learn that the sea was not split for them until they entered up to their noses. And then it became dry land for them. So this shows that they had to be the bravery of themselves bringing on this part of the redemption. They had to know that God was with them and to demonstrate that to God in this test, to go in the midst of the sea. And so it's been deduced that the midst means like by their, up to their noses. Now, the question is it above the nose where they breathe or below the nose? And we all know there's another midrash of Nachshon who went in first, and then those that followed. And if you think about a flash mob, usually there's one person that starts something out, and it's usually the second person that is the tipping point, right? When someone does something, just one person, or any kind of activity, if you've never seen a flash mob occur, that's where people all come together and start dancing. You might think, okay, this one person's doing it. Maybe they're a little crazy. Maybe they're, a solo, unique person. And then the second person joined in, and it tips the scales. And so we have to think about when Nachshon went in, who's like the second person? Would you have been the Nachshon or the second person to enter the Reed Sea, to then cause, in the midst of it, to walk on dry land? Yeah. That's a great question here.
Obviously, people come in different heights, so what's up to your nose might not be what's up to somebody else's nose.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So everyone had to meet the challenge for themselves, right? So maybe if I'm taller, I have to go in farther, but a kid does to go in less to a height of deep. And so I think that this is beautiful. What you asked is that when we think about a challenge we have to take on in life, it's not that everyone has the same challenge. We all have different challenges based on our own unique self, identity, upbringing, stature. And so there's something about that is like what for them. So does that mean that everyone experienced the splitting of the Reed Sea at a different time? Or the fear of, I could drown here? Because we know they probably weren't taught how to swim. They were slaves. But there's this trust they had to have. So each had to encounter a trust, a relationship with God that was unique to them. And we do learn later on from our rabbis, way, way, way later on, is that there's actually a merit to teaching your kids to swim. You're actually an obligation of a parent is to teach their kids to swim. Because at this very moment when we were standing at the Reed Sea, it was extra scary because we did not know how to swim. So all of this has worked up an appetite for everyone, right? An adrenaline rush, anxiety. So what happens from the Song of the Sea to Snacks of the Sea? So the Midrash here, Shemot Rabbah, chapter 21 says, Rabbi Nacharai expounded, an Israelite woman would pass through the sea with her son crying in her hand, and she would extend her hand and take an apple or a pomegranate from the sea and give it to her. Let me turn the page. To her child, as it is stated, he led them through the depths as through the wilderness. Just as in the wilderness they lack nothing, so too in the depths they lack nothing. That is what Moses said, these 40 years the Lord your God has been with you. You have lacked nothing. So I think this is so beautiful, is even though we all might have felt like the little boy that we were scared of what was going on, and God had to see, were we up to this challenge of freedom to journey forward? Just as he had said to Moses, why are you crying and praying to me right now at this moment of uncertainty? You and the Israelites journey forward. So that was their test. God wanted to make sure we were comforted in that process, that we would lack nothing. Just as so they were in the desert, they were given the manna. Here at the splitting of the Reed Sea, they were also giving fruit for comfort. Maybe they were hungry. Maybe sometimes we need to emotionally eat. So there's an apple and a pomegranate. Now, I want us to think about the imagery that apples and pomegranates invoke for us. Can we think of a quintessential tree that could have been a pomegranate tree or that is represented in artwork by medieval artwork that's an apple tree?
Israel produced certain fruits associated with the Holy Land. They include dates and pomegranates and figs, and they don't.
Exactly. So we have 7 species of Israel. So that's why in our tradition, this tree is linked to a pomegranate tree. But in medieval art from Europe, where apples grew, it's represented by apples. But can anyone think of the tree that I'm talking about? And why here in the Midrash, that's much later, would be saying pomegranates and apple trees? What tree is it?
It's the tree of knowledge that was in Gan Eden.
Yeah, but nowhere in the scriptures does it say anything about an apple, like, okay, the tree of knowledge, in the Garden of Eden and all that. Nowhere in the scripture does it say that the forbidden fruit was an apple.
Exactly. It's only in medieval art. It's from Europe in medieval art. So in the tree of knowledge, there was a fruit that was forbidden for Adam and Chava to eat in the Garden of Life in Gan Eden. And it's thought that this tree could be a pomegranate tree. So there's something I think interesting here that's going on with this midrash, that as they are walking through the splitting of the Reed Sea on dry land, what is growing but the tree of good and evil? And they get to pick from it. So there's this moment where they are getting consciousness in their journey through freedom. And I won't just say that they were, because they were freed, but they still had to work through what is this enslavement mentality. And we see that's a theme that we encountered through the 40 years in the desert. This moment, almost like they're birthing themselves into freedom. They're going through their own freedom. They're eating from this tree of knowledge, this tree of consciousness. And it's pretty amazing to think about what's happening about this moment that they had to earn that. It was the merit of their ancestors, the merit of what they did in Egypt on that moment for their freedom. And now they're going through this birthing canal, eating from the tree of good and evil, of gaining consciousness and making it to the other side. And knowing that God is sustaining them and providing them nourishment. If that's that they're hungry and they need a snack at this moment, if they're hungry for knowledge, their thirst for a connection with the divine. Isn't that pretty beautiful to think about? And this whole moment that was going on, if we think back to it, it was day, then it was night, and uncertainty of what's going on. They're birthing themselves into becoming a people. I just want to mention the last paragraph here in this box before we move on. Nothing was lacking. All they had to do was mention something, and it would be created before them. Which is just so beautiful to think about this idea that manifesting anything could be created for them. They were totally cared for in this time period when they're in the desert. Now, some will say that actually when they crossed the Jordan River into Canaan, that is when they birthed themselves. That's like the birthing canal. And the whole period that they were in the desert, it was almost like an incubator. It was the gestation period. So they're in the womb because nothing was lacking for them. God took care of everything. We have the well that was provided in the merit of Miriam. We have the cloud cover provided in the merit of Aaron. We have the man that's provided for them. So we can think for ourselves of what do we think, which is the birthing canal, which is in the womb. But there's something magical here, how God is supporting them, even through this scary moment. And we think also about the idea of a mikvah, of where we have a lot about ritual purity, of when we're in a mikvah, it actually is supposed to represent a womb. So there's something beautiful about the imagery of the mikvah waters and also the waters here when they're splitting of the Reed Sea and later on in the splitting of the Jordan. So speaking of that nourishment of the man, I want us to look at what it says. This is it's just a few verses after what we had read. We're now in Shemot chapter 16. And you can think about if they're in the womb, is it the umbilical cord connected to God with the placenta? Or we can also see it as dessert. So let's read together. What exactly is this man that they were able to eat and be sustained with and nourished by in the desert? Does someone want to read for us in box 5?
House of Israel called the food manna. It was like a colander seed, but was white, and it tasted like pastry wafers, fried with honey.
Amazing. So, right, doesn't that sound delicious, like dessert? Pastry or wafers fried with honey? That kind of sounds like a funnel cake at the carnival, right? I also imagine it could taste like baklava, right? Does that sound like similar? Or think about, has anyone ever been to a Hanukkah celebration from a Sephardic or Moroccan family? Yeah, they have this fried dough and they put honey on it, svij. So it sounds like this was pretty delicious that they were able to have, and this would be nourishing. If I could eat dessert all day and get vitamins and have protein, sign me up. And so there's something also here. I bolded the Hebrew. So this is where you get the word for manna. And there is a midrash that this was connected to a term in Egyptian. But we think it as like, from where did it come from? From who is it? But also that it probably maybe has a connection to ancient Egypt, which I think is also beautiful to think about in the Torah, that is in our holy language, that we occasionally will have names of individuals that are not Hebrew. You know, we have Shifra and Puah's name. We have Bat Paro. We have Moses. So we have also here, too, that it's connected to where people live in the diaspora, and that, too, is holy. We think about that in Megillat Esther, how Esther's name, she's really Hadassah. So I think that just kind of is something to see the juxtaposition of living in two worlds. But also there's a challenge in that, because how do you stay true to who you are, but you have outside influence? And so I think even as here, as they're trying to name this holy, nourishing connection from the divine, they're using the language that they know. And we think about when we study Talmud, it's in Aramaic. Or Chatzi Kadesh, Kedish Yatom, it's in Aramaic. And that was because it was the vernacular language that people used in the Babylonian Empire and afterwards. So I want to just read a little bit more about what this man is, this dessert on snacking. I'm sorry if you guys are so hungry, but there's still some leftover food. I'm enticing you with the funnel cake and the baklava. So here what Rashi expands on this in the final box. It's a type of dough fried in honey, which is called askif gertin in Messianic Hebrew, and that is also how Onkelos translate it. So I think it's just something really beautiful about dessert that we have way back at this moment when we were recently freed, and nothing tastes as delicious as freedom. And can someone read for me the Hebrew that is in that final box?
Ketzapichit.
Beautiful. So occasionally in Israel, you see places that will use this term for dessert. So it's pretty incredible. And all over in the Middle East, there's often desserts that are called manna from heaven, or dessert of the gods, that tend to have some kind of fried dough or vanilla wafer, a honey component. And so I just want to encourage us for this next week and thinking about for next Shabbat, can you come up with a dessert of your own that you can make for next Shabbat that has something that's kind of tasty like this, that has honey, vanilla, wafers in it, that can be your version of the manna from the divine.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast website or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information on Temple Beth Am, Los Angeles, please visit www.tbala.org.